1:1. Hebrews 1:1. A lot of great quests in life that we could be pursuing. One great quest that you will have to pursue for the rest of your life is learning to hear the voice of God. It comes out of relationships, so there's no formula. I'm going to teach you some things about discerning God's voice, but in reality, the only way to really learn it is by experience. To learn it because you have a relationship with Jesus, and Jesus speaks. It's normal. He says, "My sheep hear my voice." It's a normal thing to hear the voice of Jesus. I meet people who say, "I never hear God speaking to me. I never hear Jesus speaking to me." It's normal. How do you have a relationship without talking? So he wants to talk. He has many things to say to you. There's times he even told the disciples, I'm not going to keep speaking. There's a period of time I'm not going to keep talking, which implied that he had been talking all along regularly. It's part of the relationship between the master and the disciple. And so it's normal for you to hear the voice of God. But we have to learn how to do that, how to discern it. And Hebrews 1:1 says that God at various times and in various ways spoke in times past. And so he speaks at different times in different ways, which makes it requires of us that we learn how to discern his voice, because he doesn't speak the same way every time. You can ask the Lord questions. You should ask him a lot of questions. And he may answer through a radio broadcast or a song or a message that you watched on YouTube or a church sermon or a prophetic voice. And then the next time you ask him a question, you can't go back to that prophetic voice and say, "I've got another question, speak to me again," because God may not choose to use that as a way to speak to you. He may not use that same radio program or that same author to speak to you for your next question. And what that does, I think the reason he does that, it keeps it so that it has to be based on relationship, not a formula. He doesn't want to be a vending machine where we put in the right amount of coins and we get the same thing out every time. He doesn't want to play. He doesn't want to participate in that. So the way that he does it is every time that he speaks to you, it'll be different. It's not to say he can't speak the same way twice. He does, and he has. But he speaks at different times in different ways to keep us reliant and to keep us connected and keep it real. Otherwise, it just becomes a religious thing. It becomes a ritual, a formula, a Coke machine, and he doesn't want that. He wants a living, real relationship. And so we need to know how to hear from the Lord. There's an animated movie made by Steven Spielberg called The Prince of Egypt. Maybe you saw it when you were a kid. The Prince of Egypt is the story of Moses. And there's a scene, the critical scene, and a critical part of the whole story, and also our relationship, is God speaking to Moses the first time at the burning bush. It's his encounter with the Lord. This is where he becomes, we would say he becomes a Christian, or he has his first real encounter with the Lord. And so, and I just say that, I know he's not a Christian, but it's where he meets the Lord. That's what we say. If someone becomes a Christian, they've met the Lord. And so he's going to meet the Lord at this burning bush. And the Lord knows how to communicate to Moses. He knows how Moses hears. And so he created this bush that wasn't burning because he knew Moses would turn aside out of curiosity to see this. God knows how to get across what he wants to you. He knows how you hear. He knows what you're interested in. He knows your bend. He knows what buttons to push, what strings to pull. He knows how to get your ear. So it's not entirely based on your great ability to hear. It's based on his great ability to speak. He knows He says, I know my sheep and they follow me. So he knows you. He knows how you hear. So he knew that Moses would pull aside. And while Spielberg was, crafting that amazing moment, it's a central part of the movie, they were talking around the table, all the people who are designing the movie. And they're talking about the lead actor who's playing Moses. His name is Val Kilmer. And there's this moment where, Val Kilmer comes to the burning bush, and they were wondering, who's going to play God? Who's going to have the voice of God coming from the burning bush? And they talked about Charlton Heston. He was the original Moses in the big 1950s movie. I think it was 1950s, but it would have been just funny that now Charlton Heston, who's got a big, deep voice, he would play God rather than be Moses. It was just kind of a clever idea. Why don't we get Charlton Heston to be the voice? And then there's this guy named James Earl Jones who just has a great, deep voice and does a lot of commercials for his voice. And someone said, well, let's get James Earl Jones. And they're talking about different actors who could be the voice of God. And Spielberg's just sitting there listening. And finally, they all turned to him and they said, Stephen, who do you think should be the voice of God in the burning bush? He said, oh, that's easy. Val Kilmer. They said, what? Val Kilmer? Why would you say that? He says, because when God speaks to us, he always uses our own voice. In other words, when God speaks to you, he doesn't use James Earl Jones' voice, this big booming bass voice. There'd be no discernment. Once you heard that big booming bass voice, you'd know that was God. He uses your voice. So when God speaks to you, it sounds like you. Actually, when the devil speaks to you, it sounds like you. He doesn't use a slithering, slippery, evil-sounding, crooked kind of insidious voice. It'd be no problem. You say, well, that's the devil. I can tell. I can hear the slithering tongue of the serpent speaking, so I know that's the devil. No, he just uses your voice. When your spirit speaks, he uses your voice. When your flesh speaks, he uses your voice. There's only one voice. Wouldn't it be something if you're a female and you got this male voice that you say, oh, I know that's God, because it's this big male voice. Wouldn't that be easier? But the fact is, when God speaks to you, it sounds like you. That's huge. That's important to know. Amen?